Coming off the heels of a great series victory in Atlanta on Wednesday, the Mets began a 4-game set against the Cubs on Thursday, and they got that off to a fantastic start, blowing out Chicago 8-0. Carlos Carrasco had a great start. The lineup came together once again. I'll talk about that game on the show today. And also, for a Friday Farm Report, we will discuss which prospects are untouchable at this year's trade deadline. All that next on Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Now, what a great performance to open up the final series of the first half on Thursday night. 8-0 Mets. Suddenly, this lineup that we've been a little bit concerned about looks like the same group from the first 2 months of the season that was able to kind of carry this team, and it was one of the top 2 offenses in baseball. They look back and you see it starts with a Brandon Nemo who had just an unbelievable game. 3 for 4, scored 2 runs, had a home run, drew a walk. He was just all over the place. Starling Marte, a multi-hit game. He went 2 for 5. You go up and down the lineup. Lindor got a big RBI hit. Pete Alonso was kind of quiet most of the night. Then he hits a 2-run homer late. Jeff McNeil gets a hit. First game back after his son was born. So good to see him back out there. Louis Guillorme, yeah, sure, didn't have the best day, but he did draw a walk. Eduardo Escobar, multi-hit game. Dom Smith gets a hit and a walk. And then Patrick Mazeika drove in 2 with an RBI double. So once again, we always talk about this, right? Top to bottom, every single starter got on base. Everybody but Guillorme got a hit. You had, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 guys draw walks. You had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 guys drive in runs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 guys scored runs. It's just a complete performance. And we don't need to dive into all the specifics, what happened this inning, that inning. The bottom line is the Mets go 4 for 11 with runners in scoring position, and they put up 8 runs, and they're winning 4-0 in the second inning against a team like the Cubs, who are now 21 games under 500. You felt pretty confident from the second inning on the Mets were going to win this game, and Carlos Carrasco really held that up. This is a guy that I know we've talked about all year, and as Jacob Degrom had his rehab start on Thursday, and he went out and he did what he does, dominated Syracuse. AAA batters, no match for Jacob Degrom because, hey, Major League batters are no match for Jacob Degrom. His return is imminent here. At this point, Degrom looking at one more rehab outing. I know in yesterday's show, I wasn't sure if the minor league season was continuing through the break. I kind of thought it wasn't, but I didn't have that information. Now I know they're on a break too, but they're going to get some minor league hitters together and, they'll figure it out and get DeGrom some live, whatever you want to call it, a live game, a sim game, whatever you want to say. But he's going to start again next week, and then he could be back right on the other side of the break. So suddenly you got 6 quality starters in this rotation. Carrasco would maybe the guy say, yeah, he struggled the most. The ERA doesn't look great. He's had his bad starts, but he's a 10-game winner. And the last time the Mets had a 10-game winner? Before the All-Star break, I should say. R.A. Dickey in 2012. So this is something we haven't seen in a decade that Carrasco just accomplished here. He's been good more than he's been bad. Yes, as I already just said, there's been the bad starts. But you look at the composite of everything, and he gives you a chance more often than he doesn't. And so that's where the Mets are in this interesting spot here because, do you put David Peterson in the bullpen now? Maybe, but he's been so good out of the rotation, and I think you still want him stretched out. Do you go to a 6-man rotation? It's a possibility, but you want a guy like Max Scherzer throwing every 5th day. And I'm sure a guy like Chris Bassett, as another one who's been healthy all year. He wants to go every fifth day. Carlos Carrasco and Taijuan Walker, they've been pitching every fifth day and having success, as has Peterson. So you're in this point where there's almost just too much pitching. And it's funny because I know there's still Mets fans who are banging the drum for Luis Castillo. Why? Why? It doesn't make sense to me. And we're going to talk about the trade deadline in a minute here for a Friday Farm Report, because I'm going to go through who I believe is untouchable and who could be moved at this deadline and what the strategy might be. But you're looking at this team, and the one thing I have no questions about at this point is the starting pitching. It's the one thing, and that's the thing that you're always most concerned about when you're talking about a team trying to contend. Will they have enough starters to get through the marathon of the season, which clearly, in my opinion, the Mets have already gone through, and we'll knock on wood as I say this, the worst that they're going to when it comes to the injuries to their rotation. You are about to get to a point in about a week or 2 weeks here where you're going to have 6 quality starters available. You still have Tyler McGill on the IL. I think when he comes back, he's a reliever, in my opinion. I think he has a chance for how that stuff kind of play up a little bit as a late inning guy for the Mets. Joey Lucchesi is this incredible wild card where I think we all kind of think out of sight, out of mind, but suddenly, he's making good progress on his Tommy John recovery. This team doesn't need a starting pitcher, in my opinion. That is the biggest strength of this team. You look at the lineup, and there's still the same questions we've had at DH. They're not going away. Eduardo Escobar, maybe he's coming out of it a little bit. We've seen some positive, progression over the last couple of weeks. The home runs coming a little bit now, a multi-hit game. So I don't know if third base is an issue. You look at catcher and you say, do the Mets make a move there? You're getting a firsthand look at Wilson Contreras right now. I don't know, but when I look at this Mets team, the one thing, as I've already mentioned here, that I don't question is what they're going to get out of that rotation. And with that said, as we look into the deadline, that is great because I think the two pieces that are going to command the most, that are the biggest names at this deadline, Frankie Montes and Luis Castillo, I don't believe the Mets are in the market for them. And those are the type of pieces that are out there that would require you to trade a Brett Baty type. Now, I don't think the Mets will trade Brett Baty, but who could they trade at the deadline this year? We're going to talk about that in a minute. I want to go through for a Friday Farm Report which Mets prospects are untouchable at this trade deadline, which prospects could be moved, and what's the strategy that the Mets might employ when it comes to dealing some of their top prospects. Before we get to that, though, whether you're ready to pop the question or if you're celebrating a milestone moment, find jewelry as unique as her with the modern convenience of online shopping at BlueNile.com. There you can build the engagement ring of her dreams because Blue Nile has simple online tools to let you choose the diamond shape, the size, and clarity, as well as the setting style. Blue Nile's bench jewelers will then handcraft her perfect engagement ring. Each ring is one of a kind, so you can celebrate life special moments with fine jewelry by going to Blue Nile, as they have jewelry experts on hand 24/7, available via phone or chat to help you find a memorable gift at every budget. Make your moment sparkle with jewelry from BlueNile.com, and Locked On Mets listeners will get $50 off purchases of $500 or more. This podcast exclusive includes engagement. Again, all you have to do is use the code Locked On. That's code Locked On. Plus, every order is insured, ships free, and arrives in discreet packaging that won't give away what's inside. Shop stress free and find your forever peace by going to BlueNile.com today. All right, so the title of this podcast, very simple. Which Mets prospects are untradeable at this year's trade deadline? And we'll start with the obvious, right? Francisco Alvarez is not going anywhere. I saw some talk today during the game with Gary Cohen and Rondon. They were talking about Mike Trout. Could the Angels think to maybe move him because they're in no man's land? They continue to struggle. They haven't gotten this guy to the playoffs. Maybe it's time to fold up shop. And if you were to trade a Mike Trout or even a Shohei Ohtani, you could get a king's ransom of a trade. I don't know what that happens at the deadline, but let me just put this out there. Billy Epler used to, of course, run the Angels, gets a call up, and they say, hey, any interest in getting Mike Trout and having him on your ball club? The conversation starts with Francisco Alvarez. I think Billy Epler hangs up the phone. Now, the reason why is because it would probably take more than just Alvarez to get Mike Trout, and then you have to pay Mike Trout, which no qualms there, best player in baseball. But we're talking about what the Mets, look for in their future. Francisco Alvarez is a prospect that is so tantalizing to have a offensive player that could be a 40 home run guy who could still hit for an average, who could still get on base at a good clip while still having some tools to potentially be an above average defensive catcher, that's all you could ever ask for. And even if he's not an above average defensive catcher, he has the floor of being a great DH, and he still has the possibility of being a really good offensive catcher that maybe is just a step below average defensively. That's the one thing that I think we're not sure of is how good will he be? How will that defense translate? And the bat to me is already ready, but you need him to develop as a catcher. And I also think it is good to get him in Syracuse right now and kind of see how he handles that. In AAA, you're going to see more major league pitchers that are going to be able to scout him a little better, attack his weaknesses. It's good to have him down there. Okay. And I think that the way the Mets are playing this season with Tomas Nido, with James McCann, with Patrick Mazeika, that's a move I don't think they go to necessarily this season unless the offense is really struggling. And if he just goes scorched earth in AAA at some point, maybe they consider it. But regardless of if he's up this year or not, they're not moving him for anybody. Okay, so Alvarez off the table. The second untouchable prospect in my eyes is Brett Baty. Now, if they call you about Mike Trout or a Juan Soto or some of those top 10, top 15 type players in baseball, yeah, I think Brett Baty could be on the table in a certain deal. But I don't see any of those deals on the table at this specific deadline. And I look at the future of third base at the Mets, and as much as Eduardo Escobar was supposed to be the guy, he's only on a 2-year deal, and he hasn't had a great first season. So that space at third base is wide open. And obviously, Mark Vientos is the closest to the big leagues, but defensively, I think he profiles as a first baseman DH. So with that said, you got Brett Baty, who is tearing the cover off the ball in Double-A. I imagine he gets a promotion to Triple-A Syracuse at some point. Maybe that's one of those things where, all right, when Vientos gets the call up, you see Baty kind of fall behind. We saw that last year as well. So maybe that is the timeline for him to get to Syracuse. But regardless of any of that, this is a guy that is a really high floor prospect, in my opinion. He can hit to all field. He's starting to tap into the game power a little bit more because it's always been there. The average exit velocity has always been strong with Baty, but he hit the ball on the ground a little bit too much. Now he's starting to lift enough. And so you're seeing some of that game power translate as 12 home runs now, unless he hit another one tonight, because it seems like every night you check the minor league stats and you find more homers from some of these Mets top prospects. And also defensively, I should add, at third base, I think he will stick at the position. And if not there, he could be an above average corner outfielder. So Brett Baty and Francisco Alvarez, in my eyes, are the two clear-cut, untouchable prospects. There is not a trade out there that I see them getting moved in. From there, the conversation gets interesting. I look at the Mets farm system, and there's a lot of prospects that I really like. We've heard me talk about Mark Vientos and glow about him pretty much every other episode for the past couple of weeks and really dating back to the offseason. So you know my feelings on Vientos. Ronnie Mauricio is a prospect that I think is very polarizing in that there's some people that love him. There's some people that say move him immediately. You listen to my takes in the offseason, I said I'd move him because I felt like this could be the next Ahmed Rosario where the tools kind of entice you, but then once he gets to the big leagues, the flaws and the holes in his game will just be illuminated. With that said, I took my trip around the minor leagues earlier this summer to get my first hand look at a lot of these guys, and the guy that popped to me more than anybody, more than Alvarez, more than Baty, and obviously they just didn't have a great game when I was there, but the guy that really wowed me was Mauricio, and the tools jump out at you. So you're not going to trade him for nothing. But those are the next two prospects, right? That's the big four in the Mets farm system. It's Baty, it's Alvarez, it is Mauricio, and it's Vientos. And then from there, we talk about some other guys. And so you got Calvin Ziegler, a pitching prospect that is a big spin rate darling. Mets love him. Don't see him necessarily being on the table, but you never know. You got Matt Allen, who's still in this process of coming back from Tommy John, but has the highest ceiling of any pitcher in the Mets system. You have Alex Ramirez, who's, I believe, still 19 years old and is now in high A, who has the chance to be a 5-tool center fielder. So there are so many prospects. Now, this is a farm system that in years past, you didn't really see it. Now you're starting to see some of that talent kind of rise to the surface here. And as you approach a deadline, you have to decide which of these pieces do you deem untouchable. The two I already mentioned are the no-brainers, okay? Teams can call, but you're hanging up the phone as soon as they say Beatty and Alvarez. There's other prospects that aren't quite untouchable, but I think the Mets would be less likely to move. So I want to talk about those prospects in just a minute. I've already mentioned all the names, but I want to dive a little bit deeper and also talk about a strategy the Mets could have at the deadline. Before we get to that, though, betonline.net is your number one source for all of your betting needs and sports info. Find out the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, as BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, so who else is untouchable to this Mets team when it comes to their prospects? You'd think I would start with the two main guys, right? Mauricio and Vientos. We're not starting there. We're going to start with Matt Allen, Calvin Ziegler, and Alex Ramirez. To me, if I'm talking about untouchable in this Mets system, surprisingly enough, even though I think Mauricio and Vientos are better prospects than those three I just mentioned, I view them as untouchables. Now, last year I might have said the same thing about Pete Crow Armstrong. So there's degrees to this. In the right deal, you're trying to put your team over the top, you maybe make a move. But apparently, Gary was talking about during this game. I didn't hear the interview, but I guess Sandy Alderson was saying that because of what Pete Crow Armstrong is doing this year, which is tearing the cover out the ball in the Cubs system, the Mets are a little bit hesitant to have a similar situation arise this year when they trade a prospect and he pops in a new system immediately. So here is the kind of dilemma you have as you look at the deadline and what the Mets are trying to do. I think if the Mets were to trade any of those three guys or even Vientos or Mauricio, it's either got to be the one trade that does everything for you, which means gets you your big bat and your bullpen arm, if not two bullpen arms, or you're trading for control. So you're trading for a DH piece that has control. You're trading for a new starting for third baseman for the next 3 years. You're trading for someone that is a super utility guy that has control, or you're trading for David Bednar, who has 3 more years of control, if I'm not mistaken, at least 3, I believe, for the Pirates, and is already one of the best closers in baseball, who also is one of the best multi-inning relievers in baseball. Those are the type of trades where those type of guys are on the table. But the reason that I said Ziegler, Allen, and Alex Ramirez are untouchables over Vientos and Mauricio is just based on the needs in the Mets system. Since you traded Pete Armstrong, Alex Ramirez is that one prospect that you think, okay, he's going to be our center fielder of the future. And there's no one quite else like it. You got Simone Juan, who the Mets just signed, but he's so green. I mean, they just got him. You have no idea what he's going to be. Ramirez just succeeded in low A and is already in high A at, again, 19 years old. That's a guy that I think is right there with Beatty and Alvarez in the Mets' eyes. I can't see them moving him. Now you go to the pitching side and think about all the pitchers the Mets traded. Now they haven't all worked out great, but you still dealt Anthony Kay. You still dealt Justin Dunn. You still dealt Simeon Woods Richardson. You still dealt Kevin Smith. There's been a lot of pitching that has left this system. And right now you're lucky that you've seen David Peterson and Tyler McGill kind of ascend to be, long-term starters in this rotation, guys that could be fixtures. But you need to have those starting pitchers that, in the future could really help you. And I look at Ziegler and I look at Allen as the two guys that I think the Mets really love more than any other pitchers in their system. Ziegler, it's always been the spin rate, and he's having great success this season. Allen could be an ace one day. That type of future, that type of ceiling is something that I don't think the Mets are willing to deal. All that said, that brings us to the two guys, right? The two main trade chips that I think if the Mets make a big swing, they're the prospects that are the most on the bubble. And it's Mauricio and Vientos. I think with Vientos, you do have that idea that, hey, this season we can use him. And with that, that's why I knock him a step below Mauricio when it comes to who I would trade. Also, I think Mauricio, for the right team, probably has more value as a shortstop prospect who, if someone loves Ronnie Mauricio, they probably see him as a 5-tool shortstop, or maybe not 5-tool because not quite with the speed, but a guy who has a big arm, huge guy, big frame, really athletic, who can drive the baseball. Personally, I look at him and I've said it before. I see Joey Gallo. And I know it's a weird comp, but I see him as a future right fielder who maybe is a huge strikeout guy with a lot of pop. The plate discipline's not where Gallo's is when it comes to drawing walks, but maybe he can develop that because there's so much in Mauricio's game that's left to be determined. That's the guy that I would most like to see moved at this trade deadline to get that big piece. Now, to trade Mauricio for a rental is going to be a tough pill to swallow. And that's why, again, I get back to, let's just say Ronnie Mauricio is the headliner in a Wilson Contreras, David Robertson trade. That's something that I think the Mets should consider because, hey, you get your lockdown reliever, a guy who's closed big games for a long career. You get a catcher that, yes, is a rental, but is arguably the best offensive catcher in baseball this year. Huge upgrade at a premium position, and also a guy that can DH for you. And then if you can make that trade without Mark Vientos, let's just say it's Ronnie Mauricio, JD Davis as a throw-in, kind of a sweetener for the Cubs, and then, pick a pitching prospect. Maybe it's Dominic Hamill. That would be a lot. I don't know if you have to even throw him in there. Maybe it's something like a Mike Vassell. I don't know if there has to be that other piece. Personally, if I'm Billy Epler, I'm saying, hey, Ronnie Mauricio, you saw what our Pete Crow Armstrong's doing for you. Here's Ronnie Mauricio. You got two, prospects that could be, your top two prospects if you're the Cubs if you make this deal, and you're giving us a couple of rentals. So that could be the type of a move you make. Generally, a team like the Cubs will want a couple of the pieces thrown in, whether that is J.D. Davis or a low-level prospect. Maybe it's a flyer that the Cubs would take, but that's the type of deal I could see Ronnie Mauricio going out in, or I could see him being the main piece in a trade that, could take a couple of other prospects to get it done, but not including any of the names we've mentioned today. That's how good of a prospect Mauricio is. And for the right team, you'll have that type of value. I think the Mets are in an interesting spot here because honestly, if they had to just roll it out with what they got, there's still a good chance they can win this division. But this is Steve Cohen's Mets. This is an all-in team. And with that said, they're going to be aggressive to make some kind of move. You just don't want to make a move that hinders your franchise for the next 6 years because you traded the wrong prospect. As much as you look back at that trade last year at the deadline, you could say it's a massive failing now. That's just the business of making trades during a season. You're always going to pay a premium. And if you were to look at that trade, Javi Baez was really good if the Mets around him were good as well. It could have been a great trade. Unfortunately, the team struggled, so the trade becomes a failure. They did get Trevor Williams out of the deal, so it is the Trevor Williams trade now, but you get where I'm going with all of this. It's a risky proposition to make these deals at the deadline. It's why I'm always kind of mixed on what I would like to see the Mets give up, because as much as I'm always looking at what's in front of us with this season here, you also have to wonder what's ahead. So the Mets got tough decisions to make. I'm glad that I don't have to make them and I can just kind of sit back here and analyze what happens. But that's kind of the way I see the top prospects heading into this deadline for the New York Mets. That's going to be all, though, for this week on Locked On Mets. It's been a really fun one. I am about to go on vacation. Saturday, I will be at Wrigley Field checking out Max Scherzer starting for the Mets in person for the first time. I'll be there on Sunday as well. And then I'm going to be spending the whole week out there in Chicago with family. So next week, just for you to know, if you are watching on YouTube, we'll still have the podcast posted, but they're most likely going to be audio only for the week. And we'll get back to the regularly scheduled program on the other side of the break. Next week, I plan on doing some trade deadline stuff. We're going to talk about the Mets All-Stars a little bit. Pete Alonso is going to win the Home Run Derby next week. I'm forecasting. So that'll be a show. Obviously, on Monday, recap this series, and we'll kind of go from there as we get to the All-Star break and then get into our trade deadline coverage, which, of course, will be a lot of transaction talk. Who are the Mets going to target? All that good stuff that I know you all love. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. And after your second listen, check out Locked On MLB Prospects. We got the MLB draft coming up, and Lindsey Crosby is your prospect encyclopedia, having you covered with everything going on there. Make sure you make Locked On MLB Prospects your second listen, and you can find that wherever you get podcasts.